Democrats are playing minorities for fools. Minorities, in general, have been and are now being manipulated and controlled by the left and Democrats in particular. The sad and actually pathetic truth is minorities have been lied to and tricked into pushing their own subjugation. How, as a minority, can you not see that Democrats are your enemy? They are not your saviors. Far from it. Let's go over some historical facts. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution. You know, that amendment that abolished slavery? The vote tally was Republicans 100% for, Democrats 23%. So that's right, from the very beginning, it was the Republicans that backed African Americans way more than Democrats. But let's move on to the 14th Amendment, the amendment which gave citizenship to freed slaves. The vote tally there was Republican support 94%, Democratic support 0. That's right, you heard me correctly. 0 Democrats voted to give African Americans citizenship. It doesn't stop there. The 15th Amendment, that amendment which gave both African Americans and women the right to vote. The vote tally was Republican support 100%, Democrat support 0. Bupkis. Not one Democrat gave neither African Americans nor women the right to vote. And back during this time, African Americans knew that it was Republicans and only the Republicans on their side. When did this change? Lyndon Johnson, the 36th President of the United States during the 1960s, this is the time the Civil Rights Act was passed. What Lyndon Johnson truly did think of the Civil Rights Act and African Americans in general has been quoted. And here's his direct quote, so please don't get angry with me for the language within this quote. "These Negroes are getting pretty uppity these days, and that's a problem for us, since they've got something now they didn't have before. The political pull to back up their uppityness. Now we've got to do something about this. We've got to give them a little something, just enough to quiet them down, not enough to make a difference." That was his quote. And then he went on to say in another time, "I'll have these N-words," and he actually used the N-word here, "voting for us for the next 200 years. And this is a quote directed to the man. Here is what I think is always overlooked about this time period. From 1945 until the 1960s, the biggest gains made by any subculture of America were made by the African American people. They grew literally 3 times faster than any other group economically, including whites. Excuse me. Think about it. After World War II, the country had just fought in the foxhole together, and race relations were making huge strides forward. After all, if the man saved your life in the war, you couldn't rationally hate him anymore. African Americans at this time had a marriage rate higher than those of whites. Literally, more than 90% of African American families were intact during this time. And what did the Democrats do to this? They pulled off what is truly the greatest trick in political history. They put out legislation directly aimed at destroying the African American family unit. And it worked, at least by their standards. By the 1970s, the African American family unit had started to crumble. They created a perpetual welfare state where African American women could and would start to depend on the government to replace the role of the father. This destroyed African American families. This has continued all the way until the present day, where 80% of African Americans are now born to single mothers. The real travesty here is that the Democrats somehow convinced the African Americans through deception and lies that the Democrats were on their side. And the Republicans, remember, the party who fought for their freedom, fought for the right for them to be citizens and their right to vote, were now their enemies. This is why I'm saying the Democrats pulled off the greatest scam in political history. And they did it on the African American community. And they still are perpetuating it today. The Democrats, with help of the mainstream media, are still manipulating the truth today. I mean, look at the picture that I know most people have had to see by now. The picture where Hillary Clinton is kissing Robert Byrd. Robert Byrd was the Grand Dragon, the leader of the actual KKK. The KKK. And he was what they called a Grand Dragon, the actual leader of the KKK. She did even worse. She gave a speech where she called Robert Byrd her mentor and someone of great nobility. Great nobility? Are you kidding me? This was actually the leader of the KKK. These deceptions and political games are still being played today. Think about how Hillary Clinton's self-described mentor was the leader of the KKK. And Donald Trump has been labeled a racist. That's what they do. The left, they act horribly and then accuse the right of doing it. And with the help of the mainstream media, they convince people to believe it. I implore the minority communities of today to stop falling for these deceptions and lies. I wish there was a better word for this. Stop being dumb. You unfortunately are being used, and you've been used as useful idiots. A group of people advocating for policies and politicians which and whom work against you. Think about that simple trick they just played in the last presidential election. Hillary Clinton is in a picture kissing the Grand Dragon, the leader of the KKK. And on record, You can go look this up right now on the internet. In a video speech, she is flowering this despicable, disgusting human being with praises of high nobility, saying, and this is her quote, "My friend and mentor, Robert C. Byrd." Her friend and mentor? Whines? That's deplorable. That's deplorable. That really is. Your friend and mentor, the leader of the KKK. And somehow, out of this, Donald Trump, the man who was awarded by Jesse Jackson for promoting racial equality, winds up the racist. How can that possibly happen? This is a red pill moment. Minorities, especially any African Americans, the women who claims that the leader of the KKK is her friend and mentor, comes out described by the mainstream media as the savior of the African American community. And the man who never once, being in public life for 40 years, ever was described as a racist before he ran for election and was actually awarded by Jesse Jackson, is crucified every day by the mainstream media as a racist. This is what the left does, and it's what they've been doing for decades. Remember, the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery gained 100% of Republican votes. The Democrats didn't even reach 25% of their votes. The 14th Amendment, which gave citizenship to freed slaves, 94% of Republicans supported this. Zero, not one Democrat supported it. And the 15th Amendment, the amendment which gave both African Americans and women the right to vote. 100% of Republicans supported this. Zero Democrats supported it. And the African American community somehow, still to this day, falls for this false narrative hook, line, and sinker. And they are doing it now, once again, right before our eyes. Look at DACA, the DREAM Act. It's in the news today. This law was unconstitutionally created by presidential decree and had been sitting in the Washington swamp for years with no one acting on it. Just sitting there, being used as a political tool. The DREAM Act last year was heading for judicial disaster. It was going to the courts where it would have been found unconstitutional. You cannot make laws as president. And that is what the last president did. So in court, it would have lost instantly, would have made the dreamers susceptible to immediate deportation. And it was President Trump who pulled it out of that situation. And he did exactly what the Constitution called for and gave it over to Congress. And for Congress to compromise on a bill and to do it in 6 months. And here we are, 6 months later, and Donald Trump has put a framework on the table that pisses off both sides because it's a realistic solution to the problem at hand. Neither side gets what they totally want, but both sides get something that they want. That is what a compromise is. Better yet, he solves the main causes of the problem. So we, as Americans, will not be here again with the same problem in 10 years. And he didn't just pass this law by presidential decree. He told Congress to compromise. That's their job. Not only that, Donald Trump included the Dreamers who would qualify for the DREAM Act, who were too afraid to come out of the shadows and sign up. He included these people into his plan, something the left did not even ask for. Meanwhile, once again, right along with their agenda, the mainstream media has painted Donald Trump as the racist and the fascist. So let me get this straight. The man whose plan gives almost 2 million brown people, and I know some dreamers are white, but the majority aren't. So let's lower that. So the man who gives a pathway to citizenship to over 1 million brown people is labeled a racist. And the man who took a previous president's decree, this is what fascism is, one person making laws. He took that and handed it over to Congress and told them to work on a compromise and pass a law. He, Donald Trump, in this instance, is described as the fascist. This is what the mainstream media does. It's not only a lie, but it's the complete opposite of the truth. If this basic truth doesn't red pill you, then I'm sorry, but the brainwashing has truly taken hold, and you need to seek psychological help. I know this has been a lot of information, but hopefully I have laid it out in a plain enough an objectively minded person will see it clear. The Democrats are complete false prophets. In fact, they are the biggest enemy of the minorities, and they do it with evil intent. They do it to solidify and maintain their hold on power and riches. You still don't believe me? Answer this. How does a civil servant, after all, that's what a politician is, a civil servant making a civil servant's salary, amass a $40 million fortune? Maxine Waters, that lady is worth more than $40 million on a civil servant's salary. How is that possible? These people are corrupt and evil. Somehow, we need to shine the light of truth on this massive, decades-old scam being perpetuated on the poor people of America. I hope you found this video informative, and good luck to you.